So I just asked ChatGBT to be a Spanish learner who's just started learning and is feeling frustrated, and to come up with 10 questions to ask a fluent Spanish speaker as to the most effective and efficient way to reach fluency. For those of you who don't know what ChatGBT is, it's a language learning, artificial intelligent internet thing. The way that I look at it is it's like the internet being creative or being intelligent. So when you go to Google and you want to find something, you have to type it in and you have to be very specific with what you type in for Google to give you the results. ChatGPT, you type it in, but then it goes and creates the results, finds it, and then types it out for you as if it's a real person on the other end speaking to you. For example, you could even say something and make it be creative. So you could say, write a poem about learning Spanish in Sydney, drinking a coffee and eating pancakes every day, but the pancakes are horrible. Something really random, and it will write a poem about that off the cuff. So somehow this program searches the internet and knows how to write a poem, knows what words rhyme, knows how to make it. It's just mind-blowing. If you haven't heard of ChatGPT, you will very shortly. And if you have, then you know what I'm talking about. So I typed into ChatGPT, you are a person who wants to learn Spanish, but you are feeling very confused as to how to learn. I want you to come up with 10 questions that you would ask a fluent Spanish speaker as to the most efficient way to reach fluency. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just go through these 10 questions. I have not scripted this. I haven't even looked at the questions. I'm just going to answer them off the cuff. So number one, what are the most effective ways to practice speaking Spanish? The most effective way to practice speaking Spanish is obviously to expect that you're not going to be very good, like anything that you do for the first time, and just trying. Although I have a bit of a different opinion on this. A lot of people think that you should start trying to speak from day one, and to me that's like trying to throw a baby into the ocean and expecting it to swim. Instead, what you've got to do with the baby is like start it in very shallow water and get it to kind of get comfortable, and then slowly you introduce it and you give it floaties and you get it there slowly, and eventually it becomes like an Olympic swimmer. Same thing with language learning. If you try and speak from day one, you have so little idea of how to speak and you have such a little vocabulary, it's just not really going to make sense. So in my opinion, it's actually best to start learning some of the fundamentals of Spanish in terms of the grammar, and try and see that in different contexts, and then start really trying to speak after a couple of months, because then at least you're going to have a bit more of a vocabulary and an idea how to structure some sentences. Of course, if you're an extrovert and you just want to try and speak and go for it, then go for it. But in my experience, it felt way more efficient in the beginning to actually just like pack on some vocabulary and learn some stuff, rather than try and speak and just look like a total fool. There is one interesting thing with language learning though, which is that they say one of the best places to learn a language is in a bar. So if you go to a bar or a pub or a club, probably not a club because it's too loud, it's one of the best places to learn a language if you're in a country where the people speak the language that you're trying to learn, because after a couple of drinks, you start to really relax and try and speak, and you don't worry about your errors too much. You just give it a go. And so that's another technique for certain people that will work. Cool. So number two, should I focus on learning grammar or vocabulary first? Really interesting. I think there's a way to do both, and I created a way to do both in my course, Calculated Spanish. So I think that learning grammar, they come hand in hand. When you learn grammar, you haven't actually learned it until you've practiced it a whole bunch. So I can teach you what subject pronouns are or what interrogative words are, but you'll understand it, but then it's just natural that you're going to forget it if you don't practice it. And so what you can do is actually learn the grammar rule and then take that grammar rule and put it into different examples and then practice those examples, and that can increase your vocabulary while you're practicing something specific. So you're practicing, let's say that you're practicing pronouns, and so he, she, it, them, they, we, us, blah, blah. That's what you're practicing, but what about if we put that into like 100 different contexts where you're seeing that in different examples all the time, and so you're practicing specifically one grammar rule at a time, like pronouns, but you're actually building your vocabulary while you're practicing it because you're seeing it in different contexts. That's what we did at Calculated Spanish. I'm not going to try and plug Calculated Spanish this whole video, but if it comes up, it comes up. So yeah, the answer to number 2, should I focus on learning grammar or vocabulary first? I think you should learn grammar step by step, and each time that you learn a new grammar rule, practice it and learn new vocabulary as you practice it. Number 3, how important is it to learn the different verb tenses in Spanish? It's really important because almost every single sentence that you ever use has a verb in it. And so if you don't know how to say anything in the past or the future, people might think that you're like a spiritual, enlightened being because you only speak about the present moment. But obviously you have to speak about the past sometimes, and you have to speak about the future sometimes, you have to speak about the present sometimes. So it's very important. Although conjugation is a huge obstacle to tackle for English speakers learning Spanish, and it can seem very confusing if you don't know what you're doing. So I think in the beginning, what you should do is you should pick 3 verbs, one that ends in AR, one that ends in ER, one that ends in IR, because almost every single verb in Spanish ends in ER, IR, or AR. And then pick one that's very common, like comer or hablar, so to speak or to eat or to drink, or to open or something like that. And then study that, because once you've kind of conquered how one works, it's like a pattern across all verbs. So a lot of verbs that end in AR will be conjugated in the same way as hablar. Same with, let's say, comer, which is ER. A lot of other ER verbs will be conjugated in the same way. Some verbs are just a pain in the ass and they're not, but that's the best way to do it, is really get good at the basics of the AR, IR, and ER, and then that might take you a couple of weeks to really hone in on that, and then you should be able to start to see the patterns within other verbs as well. Number 4, are there any specific resources, books, apps, or websites you would recommend to learn Spanish? Calculated Spanish's course, 0 to 1,000 Spanish words real quick, and our community as well. Plug. Look, I really didn't find any resources that really helped me except for one-on-one lessons. And one-on-one lessons cost money. So I was paying roughly $75 a week, about $25 a lesson. I was doing about 3 lessons a week for about a year and a half. And that was definitely the thing that really took my fluency to the next level. The first year I tried to do the whole Duolingo, I tried to do grammar books, I tried to do podcasts, and they're shit. I have to be honest now. They're all right. Like, they have their place. I think Duolingo is for people if they just kind of want to look cool and have a few words in their vocabulary. But it's not going to get you anywhere near fluency, definitely not on its own at least. Grammar books are okay if you're trying to get through a grammar thing specifically. And podcasts can be good, but you have to find the right podcast for you, because if you're listening to something too advanced, it's just going to go over your head. And if you're listening to something too easy, then it's a waste of time. So I found it very difficult to find the right podcast for me at the right time, and trying to read and listen to a podcast, and yeah. So in my opinion, Calculated Spanish is the perfect model in between, because it teaches you the grammar rule, and then it gives you 100 examples, and then you're practicing one specific thing, and then all the examples come with audio. So you're practicing your listening skills, you're practicing your reading skills, you're practicing your grammar skills, you're practicing with repetition and using flashcards, so you can sit on your ass on the couch and just practice like you're doing Tinder. You go, if you don't know the word, you go left, and if you know the word, you go right. It's really efficient and it's really easy, and you're focusing on the right thing at the right time. Plug. Number 5, how long does it typically take to become fluent in Spanish? Interesting question. The studies show it takes you about 500 hours. So that 500 hours, if you go to Mexico or Spain right now and you spend 10 hours a day, then it's going to take you, how is my maths? 500 hours and you spend 10 hours a day, 50 days. So it's going to take you a month and a half to learn Spanish. And you would find that that's actually relatively accurate. So if somebody goes to a Spanish-speaking country and for 10 hours a day, they're just surrounded by Spanish, they're listening to it, they're asking people questions, they're reading in Spanish, You would think after about a month and a half, they'd be pretty much conversationally fluent. And a month and a half is not a long time. But most people don't do that. And so my method was about an hour a day. And I reached fluency at about the 18th month mark, which is about 500 days. So I did about an hour a day for 500 days, which is 500 hours. And that's when I reached fluency. If you use the methods that I teach you and you really have somebody guiding you, I think that you can probably reach fluency within about 100 to 150 hours if you're doing the right things with the right resources and pushing yourself. So 100 hours, if you do an hour a day, 3 to 4 months, I think that certain people will reach fluency. But you have to have patience. Some people it's going to take longer. Some people it's going to take shorter. It just depends on you. But let's say 200 hours. If you've got the right resources, about 200 hours in total. And 200 hours to speak another language and then to maintain fluency once you've got it is really easy because you just got to like listen to music and talk to people. And I really speak Spanish for maybe 2 or 3 hours a week, and my fluency is getting better actually in only like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours maybe. So yeah, it's to get to the fluency that's hard. And so 200 hours is the price you have to pay for this incredible, fulfilling, wonderful skill. Number 6, should I try to immerse myself in the language by speaking with native speakers or traveling to a Spanish-speaking country? If you can and you want to, yes. I didn't. My plan was to get to at least conversationally fluent, where I looked like a gringo, I sounded like a gringo, but at least I didn't have to use English, basically. As soon as I got to the point where I was like, okay, I can get by without English, then my plan was to go overseas. And I almost got to that point, and then 2020 hit, and it just wiped away my dreams of going to a Spanish-speaking country because of what happened in the world. So if you can go to a Spanish-speaking country, go. And you want to, then go, because it's going to be really inspiring. You're going to see the depth of the language within the culture, and you're probably going to have an amazing time. And it's going to give you more of a reason to learn as well. But it's not necessary. I have reached fluency without leaving Australia, and so it's possible to not if you don't want to. But I mean, at some point you got to go, right? Like, you're not going to learn a language and never go to the country that speaks it. All right, number 7. How much time should I dedicate to studying Spanish each week, or each day/week to make consistent progress? So it depends on you. Again, it's the 500-hour rule. So let's say 250-hour rule. How do you want to get there? Some people, they want to do 250 hours of like listening. Some people want to do lessons. Some people want to do group lessons. Some people want to do one-on-one. Some people want to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend and speak to them all the time. Some people want to read their way there. So it really depends on you. My routine was I split it up into thirds. So I did about 1/3 of my time I spent learning theory and grammar. 1/3 of the time I spent just listening, just listening to podcasts, and 1/3 of the time I spent doing one-on-one lessons. And I found that I did about 10 hours a week, more or less, say 8, usually about 8 hours a week. So it'd be 2 to 3 hours of grammar, 2 to 3 hours of listening, and 2 to 3 hours of one-on-one lessons. And I got there after about 1.5 years, but I went in a really inefficient way. So with the right guidance and that is, if you want to do 8 hours a week, with the right guidance, I reckon you could get there in about 6 to 8 months. Are there any particular challenges or difficulties that English speakers often encounter when learning Spanish? Definitely. There are things that exist in Spanish that don't exist in English. So not only do we have to learn new vocabulary, but we also have to wrap our head around a new way to express something. So for example, conjugation. In English, we only have one version of the past. So yesterday I ate a banana. Last year I ate a banana every day. In Spanish, they would be said differently. So when something happens just once and the action is finished and it's done, then you use comí in this example. So you say, ayer comí un plátano. But then if it's like a continuous thing in the past, it kept happening and there's no definite time that it finished, then you use imperfect, which is like comía in this example. So comí or comía. And in English, that doesn't exist. So we have to not only learn all these words, and as well in English, ate, I ate, you ate, we ate, they ate, she ate. In Spanish, it's yo comí, tú comiste, él comió, nosotros comimos, ellos comieron. It's a bloody nightmare, really. And so, for example, this is a great example. Not only do we have to learn all this vocabulary, but we have to wrap our head around a new way to think about the past. Because in English, it's just, it happened in the past and that's it. In Spanish, it's, did it happen continuously or did it just happen once? And that's just conjugation. Then you've also got subjunctive, which is really confusing. You've got male and female for objects. So el gato is the cat, or what's a la computadora is feminine, or el gato is masculine. So everything is masculine or feminine as a noun, which is kind of random, and you get used to it pretty quickly. But yeah, that's kind of strange, right? How can I improve my listening comprehension in Spanish? That's a great question. In my opinion, if you're working on something specific, you should always be working on something specific. You shouldn't just like turn up to study one day or turn up to practice and you're just like, I'm going to do 10 minutes of this and 10 minutes of that. You should always be like, okay, right now I'm trying to learn these 20 words, or right now I'm trying to learn this particular grammar rule or whatever. And then what you want to do is align everything to that. So you want to practice your grammar, doing that. You want to practice your listening skills, doing that. When you go and have a one-on-one lesson or a group lesson or speak to your friends or whatever, you want to speak to them as much as you can about that specifically. So let's take an example that you're learning conjugation, right? And you're trying to learn how to conjugate the word comer, right? What you should do is, in your theory lessons, just practice comer, right? Practice it, use the flashcards, blah, blah, blah. Then your listening time, you should write a story using comer as much as possible, and then ask a native person to record it maybe, and then just listen to that again and again and again. Because what's going to happen is you hit this moment of like click, where what you're learning, you kind of get it, 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 and then all of a sudden it clicks. And you don't really get it until it clicks, and then after it's clicked, you won't forget it. So instead of trying to bounce around and do all these different things, you should just focus on one thing until it clicks before moving on. And so how to practice your comprehension, think about what you need to be working on right now. And if you don't know, then go and get a lesson. Go and get a lesson, a one-on-one lesson. We do it at Calculated Spanish, or we do a ton of group lessons. So if you get a lesson, the teacher will be able to tell you immediately what is one of your biggest weaknesses, and then maybe they can create a resource for you. We have over 4,500 flashcards that you could practice with if you're within Calculated Spanish. And then just practice your listening skills with that particular thing. Because if you're trying to practice conjugation and then you just listen to a podcast about donkeys, then you're neither going to learn much about donkeys or conjugation. Number 10, what tips do you have for staying motivated and continuing to learn Spanish even when it feels difficult? The first 8 classes within Calculated Spanish just talk about mentality. Just talk about you getting clear on why you want to learn Spanish. And for certain people, it's certain things. Some people want to learn it so they can speak to their partner's family. Some people want to learn it so they can sound really cool. I wanted to learn Spanish because I really love the Latin culture, and I wanted to understand how they think and how they act, and I couldn't see that without speaking their language. And so it's really important before you get started to really know why you're learning Spanish. If you just want to sound cool, that's cool. Like a couple of months in, you'll hit your goal. Fantastic. But if you really want to reach fluency, it's going to be really difficult at times. And that's the truth. It's going to be, at times, you're learning a language. You're learning a language. It's easier for babies, and it takes babies 4 years to get, maybe not 4, but 2 or 3 years to finally stop sounding like absolute. I'm not going to say what I was going to say. So, it's really important to know your why. And then when it's difficult, you just got to keep going. Find out how you're motivated, right? Find out what gets you going. For example, for me, I'm a naturally extroverted person. And so when I felt demotivated, I often found that it was because I was just studying alone for long periods of time. I was just doing like listening, and I was falling asleep while trying to listen, and then trying to do theory by myself. And so then I'd do a lesson and then I'd be all perked up again. So it's really important to have some self-awareness and just keep going. And really, when you break it down, the reason why it's called calculated Spanish is because, as we said before, getting to fluency will take you a certain amount of hours. There's an actual number to it. And so some people it's going to take them 100 hours, some people it's going to take them 300 hours, some people it's going to take them 500 hours. But when you're feeling demotivated, every hour that you just keep going, you're getting 1 hour closer. And then trust me, once you get to the point of fluency, it's really easy to maintain it. It's like a rocket. When a rocket needs to get off the ground, it needs all its energy in the beginning. It's like whoosh, and going ballistic, and all of it fire everywhere, and it's just crazy, and everyone's like, oh my God, it's crazy. And then it needs less energy and less energy, all the way to the point when it's in space and there's no air, there's no friction, and it can just float literally forever, and it doesn't need any more propulsion. It's the same thing with your fluency in Spanish. It's going to be really, really difficult in the beginning, and you're just going to be lost. That's why you need guidance. Join Calculated Spanish. But then it's going to get easier, and you find, and then sometimes you're going to be like, oh, I'm in space and I'm fluent. And then it's just going to, oh shit, no, I'm not. And then at some point you're going to hit fluency, and it's the best thing ever. And for the rest of your life, it will be there. For the rest of your life, you won't have to practice. The way to practice once you get to the point of fluency is just to use it. So that's today's class, a bit of a longer one, just off the cuff, no script, nothing, just answering some questions. And I hope that you got some value out of that. If you are interested to learn Spanish, go to calculatedspanish.com and you can claim 1,000 free flashcards with the top 1,000 words in Spanish, because studies show that you only need to know about 1,000 words and how to use them in order to speak at a conversationally fluent level. And then after you claim, that's going to take you to a video where I explain what's inside the program. And it's got community, it's got resources. And if you really want to reach fluency in Spanish, then that is the place to be. Adios, amigos.